The Drum of Sacrifice. The sun was dipping behind the ancient iroko trees, casting long shadows over the village of Ezeoke. The air was thick with the scent of freshly harvested yams, and the rhythmic pounding of pestles in mortars filled the atmosphere. Yet a foreboding silence lingered in the hearts of the villagers. It was the eve of the festival of Odu, the sacred event held every decade where the drum of sacrifice was played and the gods demanded a tribute. Ezeoke had thrived for generations, its fertile soil and flowing rivers blessings from the deities, but these blessings came at a steep price. The drum of sacrifice, a relic carved from the trunk of a tree believed to have been planted by the gods themselves, was played only once every 10 years. Each beat echoed the heart of the village, but with its final thrum, a life had to be given to maintain the favor of the gods. The village elders gathered in the shrine, the sacred hut at the center of Ezeoke. Nwosu, the high priest, his face etched with the weight of tradition, stood before the drum of sacrifice. Its surface was dark and smooth, inscribed with ancient symbols that glistened in the fading light. Around him the other elders sat, their faces solemn. "Tomorrow the gods will speak through the drum," Nwosu said, his voice low but firm. "A life must be offered." The villagers had known this day was coming, but the anticipation of loss gnawed at their souls. No one knew whose name would be whispered through the drum's beat. The gods chose at random. In a quiet hut near the river lived Oma, a young woman whose laughter had once been the soul of the village. Since the death of her mother years ago, she had raised her younger brother Ikenna alone. He was the only family she had left, and their bond was as unbreakable as the river's current. She dreaded the festival of Odu for fear that Ikenna, so full of life and promise, might be taken by the gods. As the night deepened, Oma sat by the riverbank watching Ikenna play by the water's edge. He was only 10, just on the cusp of adolescence, yet he carried the strength of a warrior. His laughter, echoing through the trees, made her heart both swell with pride and ache with fear. "Oma," he called out, running to her with wet feet, "what do you think the gods do with the sacrifice?" Oma's throat tightened. "I do not know, Ikenna. Perhaps they need the soul to continue to bless our land." Ikenna's eyes grew wide. "But why must they take a life? Couldn't we give them something else?" Oma smiled sadly, brushing sand from his forehead. "The gods do not bargain. The drum speaks, and we must obey." The next morning the village square was full, yet eerily quiet. The villagers had gathered, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Nwosu, adorned in the ceremonial robes of a high priest, approached the drum of sacrifice with reverence. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft whisper of the wind. Nwosu raised his hands, and the first beat of the drum resonated through the air. The sound was deep, primal, as though it came from the earth itself. With each beat, tension coiled tighter in the hearts of the people. Children clutched their mothers, elders whispered prayers, and Oma, standing near the front with Ikenna, held her breath. Then came the final beat. As the sound faded into the air, Nwosu turned his face skyward, waiting. The gods would reveal their choice in a sign, something unmistakable. The villagers watched with bated breath. Suddenly, a gust of wind surged through the village, sweeping over the gathered crowd and circling the square. In its wake, the sacred flame near the drum of sacrifice flickered violently, then extinguished completely. All eyes turned to Oma. Her heart stopped. The gods had chosen her. A gasp went up from the crowd as Nwosu stepped forward. "The gods have spoken," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. "Oma, daughter of the river, your life is required to maintain the balance." Ikenna's cry shattered the stillness. "No, not Oma. Take me instead." He rushed forward, clutching her skirt. "Please, take me." The crowd murmured, shocked by the boy's plea. But Oma knelt down and took Ikenna's face in her hands, her eyes full of tears but steady. "No, Ikenna, the gods have chosen. You must live." But Ikenna would not be silenced. "The gods are wrong. We cannot lose you." A deep rumble like distant thunder rolled across the sky. Norsu's eyes widened and the crowd fell silent. The gods, it seemed, were listening. Then, in a voice none had heard before, Norsu spoke. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there is another way. A life must be given, but the gods do not demand it be only human." Confusion rippled through the villagers, but Oma understood. In her eyes shone the fire of hope, mixed with a fierce resolve. "The drum of sacrifice," she whispered, "will beat for a different soul." She stood tall, holding Ekenna close as she turned to the elders.